I'm back. I read another book. Um, this is the mic that I recorded, that I usually use to record. I can't find the cord for it. I'm back on my little headset, um, little Discord headset, and I'm gonna be talking about the best book I've read in the romance genre so far. And it's called Smart Girl Summer by Kristn Rockaway. This book, I believe, came out this year. Yeah, August of 2022. And I'm gonna read the blurb for you. I'm gonna give you initial thoughts. Um, and then I want to dive into it. So then I want to do like spoilers. And then like go more in depth elaborating on stuff. And I did leave annotations on the app this time. So, because I didn't realize you could do that before. So I have little notes for myself from when I read this. Mind you, I read all of this morning, because I couldn't go to sleep. So they might not be coherent. I will do my best to make sense of what I wrote. Um, Description. This summer is not going as Abby Atkinson had planned. A thieving PhD advisor, a screeching halt to her grad program, and 0 job offers have left her high and dry. Nothing a little eat, pray, love across the Mediterranean can't fix, right? Or eat, pray, tutor, more like. Her dissertation might be dead, but she can still teach. She'll have to do it for 6 weeks on a super yacht with a billionaire and his daughter. A playboy billionaire, according to tabloids, but Abby's not so sure. As big as his bank account is, his heart's that much bigger, especially when it comes to his daughter. Their strained relationship could use some mending, though, and Abby can help. She was hired to teach junior high math, but she'll make room for in her lesson plans. Falling for her boss wasn't part of the plan either, but maybe it's time she let her heart, not her head, teach her something new. So I have thoughts. Obviously, I'm so over books and like especially romance books romanticizing the idea of billionaires and romanticizing, because you can get across that this person has money. Oh no, she fell over. You can get across that a person has money and not talk about or not make them a billionaire in the sense. So like when I'm sorry, I have to push these down. I do wear shorts in these videos. I just. Um, it is so hot. They turned the AC on or the heat. It's bad. Anyway, when we talk about big and powerful and this idea of like a giant almost within business and technology, which seem to be like the biggest um, areas that romance books like to have their little billionaires in. Uh, you know, this is my biggest gripe. Which during it, honestly, I just ignored it and pretended like he was not a billionaire. But like, billionaires are good people. And I did have some notes I will further elaborate because there is some stuff from the book that I wanted to talk about this. But like, I don't know. You don't need to be a billionaire in a book to get across the point. Oh, sorry, you don't need to be a billionaire in a book to get across the point that this person is powerful. They have money. They have, they run a business and they do it with like an iron fist or something like that. Like it's not, because like stuff like this happens and these people aren't all billionaires. So just a little bit on that. I do think for romance genre, this is gonna be out of stars, out of 5, I'd give it like a 4. Um, Maybe a 4.5 because it it is full of communication and very grown up things. A lot of times when I read romance books, what catches me up is that there's always an issue caused by characters that could be very easily resolved if the characters took a few days to like compress or decompress and come back to the situation with like level heads. Like sometimes if something upsets me, I will leave for a bit and I will think about what I want to say or what I want to do and I'll come back to it. Because that's what you're supposed to do when you're a big kid. And a lot of times in these romance books, this happens where a situation could be easily prevented or navigated, and then it is not. It's not. And then these characters go about being upset and mopey and really annoying and frustrating because they don't talk to each other. And I understand, like, um, especially if it's third person, you as the reader tend to have a little bit more information than each of the characters. However, it's just one of those things where it's like, you don't need to suck the whole time. Whew. Oh my gosh, I'm so sleepy. Um, it's just one of those things where you don't need to suck the whole time, and if you're going to suck, you could at least apologize for it. So this book has a lot of like these characters are definitely adults. Because what I was getting based on that was that a lot of um a lot of these fantasy books, or not these fantasies, these romance books, read almost in a sense like a world where like preteens and kids kind of run, and people only act on their emotions and they never do self-reflection unless like pushed really hard into doing it, usually by the character that they hurt. Um, so I just I don't know, I'm just a big fan of the way that the characters are in this book, and there is so much thought you can tell put into each character that it is like it never feels like a character is wasted. Each character serves a purpose, and if they're not important, they're not named. And I think that that's really important that people should do more often, where you don't need to put so much unnecessary information about other people into the story, right? If it's not about these people, like who's Greg and James from like down the street who are mentioned buying milk from the grocery store and never again, and they serve no other purpose. So I I do really like it. It's not frustrating to read. And also, if you want to read a romance book that does not have explicit sex scenes in it, this would be the book for you. So the story is about two characters. You know the gist. I already do the gist. So the story starts with the character Abby coming home from, I guess, the lab. She is a PhD graduate student, and she had just discovered that the research that she had helped conduct for the past however long had been unaccredited to her. And her mentor, whose name is Nick, and I might forget that later, his name's Nick, he is kind of important. Her mentor had taken the work that she had done, not credited it, published it, and then used it to get a grant, right? So she comes home after, I guess, finding all this out, and she is pissed. Rightfully so. I think that that's a very justifiable thing to be upset about. So she comes home to her apartment. I think what she lives in Queens. This takes place in New York. So she comes back to her apartment, and her roommate Arpita gives her like a canned margarita. So she gives her a canned margarita, and she's like, "Spill. What's going on? What's been bothering you? I could tell it didn't go well." And she's like, "Basically, this is what happened." And she was told by the department head, whose name is Phil. I might also forget that later. His name's Phil. And she had been told by Phil that they had not found any evidence of any thievery, that she didn't take in proper precautions or whatever. So, like, the notes that she had taken during it didn't have dates on it and stuff, or like wasn't like written in a particular way. And he was like, well, technically this could be anyone's, um even though it like very obviously was hers. Her lab partners weren't saying anything because they didn't want to be ostracized in the department and were so close to graduating that they didn't want anything to ruin that. And that she had to have this summer like teaching job, or she had to have like a teaching position, like a TA spot or something like that, for graduation, that she had been denied despite it being given in seniority. And obviously, she's very close to graduation. She had just finished her research, so she should have been granted that like a long time ago, and summer's rolling around like next week, right? So Arpita's like, girl, you should just, like, do figure out what's going on. You need to kind of like refresh for a second because you're about to jump into the situation all hot-headed, and you need to think before you leap. Like, yes, you can do this and that, but you need to be rational about it because you could come across the wrong way, and that could jeopardize your situation even more, right? So then Abby is like, well, I need a job for the summer. I need to pay rent. I'll just go tutor for the summer, right? And she had been a math tutor multiple times. She's her PhD, she's going for physics. She's a physicist. And she had been part of this tutoring company before, so she emails like the director or like the owner of it and is like, hey, I've got, like unexpected shift in my schedule. I'm free for the summer. Let me know if you have any jobs. And she like within minutes calls back and is like, oh my gosh, this is great because all of like our top tutors have been taken up already. I have this like super high profile client who would love to have a tutor over the summer for his daughter. Like, I can't talk about it in person. Come meet me tomorrow. So Abby's like, you know what? Sure. Meets her tomorrow. And it's this billionaire playboy. Whoa. And that they're going to be on a yacht in the Mediterranean for the entire summer. And during the summer, for 4 hours a day, for like 5 days a week, this girl needed to be tutored. She's like 12 or something. She's in like seventh grade, so she's like 12 or 13 maybe. Um, so a pretty young girl. And that she had like failed her math class before. So Abby's like, you know what? It's gonna pay well. Sure. She she didn't want to go, like, do it at first. Her friend was like, you should travel. Arpita was like, you should travel a little bit, get your mind off of it. She was like, I'm not traveling, I'm working. And then she's like, okay, well, I guess I'll do both. So, like, the next day after that rolls around, she hops on a plane and she ends up on the boat where we meet the characters, Colette, who goes by Coco, and she is this billionaire's assistant, and the billionaire himself, whose name is Richard. And I find that so funny because that's such an unappealing name. You're telling me that I'm Abigail and Richard, that these two people could be from 2022, they could be from like 1643. You know, what a combination of names. Besides that. And we also meet Richard's daughter, Bijou, who her mother's name is Veronica. It's going to come up later. I'm saying that now in case I forget the name because I know I'm bad with names and she's not that important to the story. So, whatever. So she gets in the boat. She's like, "Oh, you know what? This doesn't seem too bad." She's super jet lagged. Goes to sleep next day. She's like ready for tutoring, and she is like, "I don't know how this girl has been failing, because she's latching on to concepts pretty fast. She's really bright, and she's like making a lot of progress even in just this first day. Like, she's like, I can see that she's good at math." Um, and then like this idea or this fear of failure is ingrained in her, you can tell. And then Richard steps in during the tutoring session, and Bijou gets really uncomfortable and is like, leave, basically, like, I don't want you here. She didn't like say that, but that's the vibe. And she tenses up until he leaves, and she's like, sorry, he's like awful. And then, but mind you, um, like later in interactions, you never see an awful side of Richard. So as the reader, you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Clearly a rocky relationship. Mind you, Abby had looked up Richard before this, and that's where all the tabloids of billionaire playboy and like he like dragged his ex-wife through this awful divorce, and that he was like super like didn't want this kid and was being like forced to pay child support because he didn't want to see his kid and all that. And you're like, that's kind of crazy, because then Richard is like, yeah, I rented this yacht from someone because for the summer because I wanted to make my daughter happy, and she said she wanted to go to the Mediterranean Sea for summer. And he was like, so I did everything that I could, like to like the biggest extent. He was like, I did everything that I could to like take her here and try to make this memorable for her. So you can tell that like the things that he's doing doesn't line up with the perception of him that you as the reader and Abby are both given in the start. And because you're both given this information at the same time, because you're with Abby as she does do this research, um, you start to like think for yourself along with her, which I personally like that kind of storytelling where you are not given all the information at once. I like to think I like to think. That's the sentence. Um, and when you're given just enough information, it really does allow you as the reader to put things together and to hypothesize. And that's where like twists and stuff are fun, because they're not meant to be perplexing to the audience. They're meant to, I mean, sure, there's shock value in it, but if I were to go reread this book, with like a big twist, I should be able to see the warning signs. It's not something you just throw out because you think it'll be shocking or, um, like out of left field to the audience, to the reader. You put it in to enhance the story, and you make sure to include points of that throughout. And that is really effective with this kind of storytelling where you do not have all the information and you find things out at the same time as the character that you're following. So I'm big fan of that. So throughout this, Abby will tutor for 4 hours, and then for the rest of the 4 hours, while they're docked, I think they start off in Spain, she would go out and adventure. And this is one of the things that I complained about in one of the other like books videos that I made, was that like, well, you don't know that much of that character outside of this relationship. You follow her to like diners, to little bars, to like she does eventually go out to like some clubs with Coco. You follow her out and you see what kind of person she is, and she surrounds herself with bits of academia in her life while she's still showing this disdain and this like betrayal for what happened to her um at school, because again, this is only like a 6 week gig. It's just for the summer, and she planned on going back to school after she had just taken the summer break to clear her head and figure things out, right? And during this time, you learn so much about her, because she goes to museums, she goes to like these historical sites, all of these things that you associate with a knowledge seeker. And so you can see that in her spare time, despite her confusion around, is this PhD even like making me happy, all of this, she still at her core is someone who seeks knowledge and intentionally does so. And that's so interesting because it builds upon her character, because she's having all of these issues with her PhD, and the question of, well, do I want this? And then also you still see how much she values and admires this knowledge and this academic lifestyle. And it just goes to show that, like I said, um, you want to put hints of how a character is or how a character's feeling or what they're going to do to explain their later actions. And this is a beautiful example of that because, like I said, the internal struggle, when she picks one, it's still obvious, it still makes sense to her character. There's not that betrayal of character to get a perfect ending, which I think is great. So, let me pull my notes up real quick. But, right. So, Abby is kind of like, okay, Richard's attractive, which I cannot keep calling him Richard. I'm sorry. I can't do this. So one of the things that Richard does that Bijou does not like is he prioritizes work. He is a working man, right? He's always on a conference call. He's always sending emails, whatever business people do. And during one of their tours, not only did he take her to a bunch of museums in a row, which to a child is not interesting, but then cut one of their tours short so that he could go on a conference call. And Bijou just has that resentment to her father because she feels like he prioritizes work and cares more about work than he does about her, which is a valid feeling to have. And Richard is like, I don't know why Bijou doesn't like me. And, Bijou had said that and had confided in Abby about that. So Abby tells him, like, my father used to do adventurous things with me. She was like, it didn't have to be extravagant. They weren't like rich. She's like, it didn't have to be extravagant. It just mattered that we were out doing something. He always did something hands on and that he spent time with me. He made time with me. She was like, he worked so much, but never did I feel like I was a second thought. And she was like, you gotta be adventurous and get out there. And he is like, perfect, great. So then he's like, the next day he's like, all right, we're gonna go cliff diving. She's like, what? And they're like, you're coming with us. And she's like, what? So they get up there and they have this guide, like this guide, and his name is like Leo, I think. And he's like, okay, you guys are gonna dive off the cliff, right? Like it's just right here, whatever. No biggie. And Abby is scared of heights. And Leo's like, come on, you're not a baby. And Richard steps in and is like, hey, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to do it. And she was like, I'll go up to the top, And he's like, I'm so for real. Like, if you feel like you're uncomfortable or you're unsafe, just don't do it. Like, don't make anyone feel like you need to do something that you're uncomfortable doing to appease them or to, make someone else happy. Like, you should put yourself first. She's like, okay, cool. What do you do? He's like, I usually just take a moment. I take myself back from the situation. I take a deep breath. I close my eyes and I try to imagine like what my options are, like how things would pan out. And then I just pick. She's like, that's crazy. And then she jumps off the cliff. And she's like, oh my God, actually that was really fun. And she does it again. And this is the first of many times in this book that Richard is telling her to do what makes her comfortable and prioritize herself, her comfort, and her happiness above what other people want from her, expect from her. And I think that's great because I think that's a great message. There's also another character I forgot to mention, which is Abby's mom. She is only ever seen on the phone, which, they don't live together, it's how it is. And in the first part of the book, she's very much ragging on Abby of, you need to figure out what's going on with your research, you need to figure out, you need to go to the dean or something like that, like, you need to figure out how to rectify this situation because you need to get your PhD, because her father was a physicist and a physics professor, before he had died when she was like a teenager. And she was like, her mom's like, you want to follow in your father's footsteps and like continue his legacy. She's like, I mean, yeah, I guess I want to continue his legacy. It's just like hard. And her mom's like, okay, well, life's hard. Figure it out. And we do find out that her mom never made it to college. She came from like a really poor background, and her biggest regret was not going to college, because she had just been working. She had met um, Abby's father. She had she was working while he was getting his doctorate. Then she was pregnant. She was working, and she just never got around to it. And then he died, and so she had to make the money again. So she is you get the sense that she's kind of projecting this fear onto Abby, or this regret rather, onto her. And that's a constant thing. She'll call and like say something like that, and they kind of get into a little spat, and then she hangs up. That's a common theme throughout this book. And during one of their little like excursions, Colette Coco is like, "Hey, I am the assistant for Richard, and I get free VIP stuff for like everywhere we go." So they go clubbing. And then they go clubbing in a different city, and Abby meets this Australian guy, and he's like, "Do you want to go on a date?" She's like, "This is my last night in the town, right?" He's like, "Do you want to go on a date, watch the sunset?" She's like, "Sure." She's not really into him. She's like, "Sure." And during the time that they're talking, before he asks her out, she mentions that she's in town for business. She's like, her boss is basically doing like a sea tour, like a private cruise, if you will, of the Mediterranean. He's like, "Oh, like one of those super rich people." He says, "Is your boss a millionaire?" And she replies with, "You could say he's well off." And he says, "What's your next stop?" She says, "Saint Tropez. We're leaving tomorrow." He says, "Funny, I thought for sure it had been the moon. It's a joke since rich people are always flying into space." She goes, "Oh, right. My boss is a good guy." He says he owns a yacht. "No one gets that rich by being a good guy." And Abby is on her. This is the hill she is choosing to die on. She's like, "He doesn't own it. He's renting." She's like, "Why are you defending him? He's right. This guy is right. He's correct." Because here's the thing. People cannot comprehend how much $1 billion is, and they never specify how much money he has. They say billionaire, so it's at least $1 billion. People do not understand how much money that is, because if they did, like, you you in this lifetime cannot work hard and make $1 billion. The only way that you can make $1 billion is by profiting off the misfortune of other people, and typically either using slave labor or destroying the environment, or both at the same time while you do it. There are a lot of shortcuts that you need to take in order to gain that much money. And like, you know, like, even billionaires like Bill Gates, people are like, "Oh, but he's a good one." And it's like, no, because he's really just using his power and influence to make sure that, like, medication isn't available in Africa. like, they're all bad. Because here's the thing. You could do a bajillion things right and get so extremely lucky and maybe become a billionaire. But are you then a good person if you hoard that wealth? Because even like $2 million, I could take that and I could be set. I could take that and I could be like, you know what? This pays for college. This could pay for a house. I could set up, if I wanted to have kids, I could set up college fund for my kids. I could get my mama a house, like all this stuff, and still have money left over. To have a billion? To have $1 billion, you're not doing anything with it. Like, not only is it just like, oh, okay, well, why are you doing that? But also, when you're not purchasing or giving money into certain things, you're not stimulating the economy. When you, sorry that this is becoming like my little economic rant for a minute, but when you have someone, especially with so much money, who is not spending it enough that they still have $1 billion, they're not helping the economy. It's actually kind of making it worse. If they use that money to pay their workers better, to, um, like, here's the thing, even if you, like, bought houses and then sold them really cheap, um, or if you helped people get back on their feet, stuff like that, um, and you give money into the economy, either directly from your workers now having more money and now maybe they can go buy the house that they wanted. So maybe now that realtor is getting more money, or maybe that homeowner that needed to downsize can get, more money or whatever. Um, Maybe now they need furniture, so now the local, furniture place can hire more people, and, maybe they do renovations, and now the contractors have jobs, and all of these individuals have more money to now spend as they would like, which goes into the economy, right? Money is being circulated. When you're not spending the money and you're just holding on to it, the money's not circulating. It's just there, you know? And to have $1 billion and to have them keep being like, no, but he's such a good guy in the book. And I'm like, is he though? Because if he was, then why is he not using it for change in a effective way? You know? And they're American too. You could buy off like a few good politicians with that money. You could like get rid of crude oil as we know it. You could create a society so environmentally friendly that we cannot even comprehend. And you're just like sitting upon your money and renting a mega yacht. So anyway. And this is another thing too, because then this is a quote that he says later on. I sold it to about how he got money. He like made an algorithm. He's like, I sold it to a big tech company, made a lot of money. I took that money, made a few careful investments, and it turned into a lot more money. And it's like, okay, dude. So why are you still, like the whole idea of hoarding money? It just didn't sit right for me, and I hate how much romance books are like billionaires, billionaires. That's not cute. I'm sick of it. They make me upset. I'm so over it. Um, and I don't know. That was just irritating to me. Anyway, so she ends up turning down the Australian guy, and she she goes back to the yacht. Well, she doesn't turn him down by saying no. She says sure. Goes back and is like, okay, well, I'll get ready. I'll doll myself up for the date. And then on the deck, she runs into Richard. He's like, hey, do you want to grab, like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, just gonna watch the sunset. He's like, do you want to grab a glass of wine? She's like, yeah, absolutely. So she ends up ditching the Australian guy, drinks on the boat with Richard, and they end up, like, kissing. And they're like, whoa, so scandalous. And then, they're kind of, like, bashful a little bit back and forth, but then she calls Arpita and is like, hey, I am kind of, I don't know. And she's like, girl, this is a bad idea. Bad idea. This is gonna end so poorly. It's gonna be so bad. And Abby's like, and then she's like, you know what? I'm here to work. I need to set boundaries. And this is the part that frustrated me, was that, she then goes, but here's the thing, I'll elaborate on it later. So then she goes to Richard, she's like, you know what, like, I'm sorry, I need to set a boundary, and he was like, oh, like, I'm so sorry, like, I didn't realize, whatever. She says, you have nothing to be sorry for, it's just better this way. And so you're like, okay, cool. Now we're gonna have like this mopey, oh, they're so sad. My literal note, my note on this is, I don't know why people waste their time like this. Because like very clearly they were both into each other. I'm like, girl, if it's a summer fling, it's a summer fling. I don't know. But then literally like 12 pages later, so not that long, she goes, chapter 13, she, sorry, hang on, let me read the quote directly to you. So, look, it's my fault, he says. I should have taken the hint when you decided not to come kayaking with us last weekend. She had declined one of like a few of their excursions for like a week or so because one, she wanted to set boundaries, and two, she wanted Bijou and Richard to focus on their relationship together and not have her be a distraction. And she had noticed that over the week they had like gotten really close with each other, so she was like, I didn't want to, whatever. And oh, sorry, the previous thing before that was, no, you're right. There should be firmer boundaries between us. I'm your employer, for crying out loud. This needs to be strictly working relationship. Does it? I only said that because I was afraid. And then he says, look, it's my fault. I should have taken the hint. She says, what? No, I stayed behind because I thought you needed some alone time with Bijou. I knew you were trying to repair your relationship. I didn't want to get in the way. And she's like, I'm glad I did. You guys are doing great. He's like, you weren't in the way, and, like, I know that our relationship has been a problem. She's like, yeah, but you're trying to fix it, and that's, like, really admirable. And then what was my direct note on this? Was communication. And then they're like, okay, cool, so they kind of had this emotional conversation about how he feels like he makes a lot of mistakes when it comes to Bijou, and that he doesn't know what to do and how to really interact with her. And they, so it's like a very like vulnerable conversation. And at one point, she kind of like grabs his hand, and he like grabs her back and stuff. And the quote here is, I grasp at his fingers, lacing them through mine. His grip is firm now, more self-assured, as if he was merely waiting for me to take the lead. And my note here is positive body language and clear reciprocation. I am such a big fan when characters have like an actual chemistry instead of just like two characters shoved together in a situation and let's see who survives. Like, after having this clear communication, and then sorry, these are like the quote in my notes. After having this clear communication, and then escalating it with touch, with physical body language, and having that reciprocation between characters, it's so comfortable. It's so comfortable to read because it feels like a natural response. It feels like a natural progression. And I was able to ignore the fact that this takes place over a 6-week period, which is incredibly short, in the grand scheme of things, especially when, like, 2 weeks into it is when this conversation happens. So you got 4 weeks left. But it just feels like such a natural progression between the characters and their relationship that it feels right. And I think that's what a lot of books in this genre miss, is that, like I said, they just throw characters into a situation and they don't include those little moments that make relationships what they are. So I just thought that was really important. That was thrown in there. And then so they end up like doing their nightly meetings in the little, like, basically they have like I don't remember what the word they used for it is, but it's like a lifeboat, but like bougie. And they end up like doing like their nightly meetings in those because they're like, they don't want to be caught by Bijou or by Coco. Bijou's room is right next to Richard's. Coco's is right across from Abby's, so they were like, oh, it's kind of awkward. And I guess there's no other third empty room in the mega yacht, but go off, I guess. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is like the Titanic. And he's like, I've never seen the Titanic. What are you talking about? And um, she's like, oh, they get in the car and then they get naked and they steam up the windows. And he's like, oh, that's crazy. And she's like, but I'm not ready for that right now. And he says, quote, I'd never want you to do something you don't want to do. I'm happy just to have this moment alone with you. And that is also what men of this genre, I literally, my note says, very good man of this genre, because a lot of men in romance tend to be assertive and not attentive. So very take what's mine because I deserve it, and not like a you're another human being and I should consider your feelings as well. And I just find this a very, like I said, it feels like a natural progression. It feels like good a good foundation for a relationship. A lot of times when you read these books and you're like, okay, well this seemed like, like maybe this could be like a really passionate like affair for a few months or a year, and then what happens, but this one feels like it has such a good basis that you don't find yourself saying, well, it's unreasonable to think that they couldn't end up together. It just feels like so great. It's a good character, it's a good relationship that they built. And again, like during this time we also see Richard step away from work. So not only do you see Abby kind of stepping out of her shell, out of her comfort zone, and doing things while putting herself before you also see kind of the flip side with Richard, where he is still stepping out of his comfort zone, but instead of putting himself and his work before everything else, he's putting his relationships before everything else. So you see that they're both growing and developing as characters, and we see a lot more of Coco, and her philosophy is what happens will happen. She's a writer in her spare time. She's like, I've been rejected from all of these like columns and publishers and stuff because they say my work's not ready, whatever. She's like, I've been doing this for years. She was like, I've done the math. I get about one rejection every 3 days. And she's like, you know what? If it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. She's like, if I get the rejection, that's fine. Because she's like, I have a job that pays my bills and it's not bad, like it's not taxing. And she was like, I just believe that the right thing will happen at the right time. And she has like a very lax view on everything. That's my alarm. She has a very lax view on life and the way that things are. And you see that in stark contrast to Abby, who has this whole plan. She's had this plan since she was however many years old, like in middle school, in high school. This is what she was going to do. This was her plan to accomplish it. And like you see this difference even between her and Arpita, who is saying, like, Coco's saying, hey, if this PhD isn't gonna make you happy, don't do it. I got a PhD, I regret it. I find no joy in any of that. She was like, if it's not bringing you joy, then leave it. And Arpita's like, you know what, take some time back, and then, get back on top of it, because you worked so hard, you don't want to throw this away. So they're on different, they almost have the same feeling and approach to life on separate spectrums, but both are very empowering. And you find that Abby is kind of stuck in that middle ground where she doesn't know what to do. And both girls on opposite ends of her life, who are now both of her friends, are so different. But the message is generally the same of, you should be happy, And that's the thing that everyone's pushing on her, which is great. What a great message to send to women. Anyway, yeah, so I even wrote down, this is my next note, is that Coco says, feeling bitter doesn't serve me. Remember my motto? If it doesn't serve you, let it go. Exactly. Does a rejection get me down? Yeah. So if I give myself a minute to get upset about it, and I move on. And I was like, that's a really good moral. That's actually really good. Then there's a point where they watched the Titanic. I don't remember. They got interrupted. They they got to the car, or not the car scene, they got to the paint, like where Jack was like drawing Rose, and Bijou walked in and was like, oh my god, are you guys watching like porn? They're like, no! So they stopped watching it because they got like freaked out and embarrassed, whatever. And he ends up going and watching the rest of the Titanic on his own, and says like something about like, oh, it's not as romantic as I thought it was going to be, like, you know, she killed him. And then Abby going on this whole thing about buoyancy and like math and physics and stuff, and how like the door, like they could have both fit on the door, doesn't work because it, you know, it was an oak door, those are dense, you know, like it wouldn't have worked out the way that you want it to. And she goes on for a while about the math, and like it's just one of those things where he's like showing interest in what she's saying, which I didn't note down before, but he had done like a similar thing about tech, that she had like basically been latched onto his every word despite not knowing or caring previously, because, you know, it's something that they're impassioned about, and to see that reciprocated on both ends, they're both allowed to be dorks, and both of them accept that and encourage that with each other. I think that's really nice. Bijou finds out about the two of them. She's like, I know you guys are bad at hiding it, I know. And then she's like, anyway, you guys should go to Paris because my friends are having a party in New York and they're gonna call me and tell me all the things I missed. I'm gonna be busy all day. And I already went to Paris with my mom, so you guys should go together. So basically she sets them up, right? So then Coco makes some arrangements, whatever. And I did have a note in here that said, she says, Paris is more beautiful than I imagined it to be. And my only note is historically historically false, because Paris is a big city, and if you've ever been to a big city, you've been to all big cities. They are disgusting. This is actually a phenomena in Paris, where Japanese tourists will come to Paris and have this idea of what it's supposed to look like and what, you know, the idea of beauty, and they get there and it's so disappointing that they become actually suicidal. And I think there's a similar trend for, I don't know if it's English people or if it's Americans, and I want to say India, but like another country like that. So it's not just this one example, but like from a completely different kind of culture where this also has occurred, where people will like hype up a place so much in their head and they get there and it's so disappointing because it's just a big town. There are tons of rats. How do you think the rats got there in Ratatouille? Tons of rats in Paris. You know, there's trash places because it's a big city, and big cities are gross and disgusting by nature. It's just like Paris is historically not actually, you know, most people don't be saying that. Oh, they got in a car at some point, and I read the text as Allons-y, and it was Allons-y. So that was cool. I don't know why that was so embarrassing. I sat up out of my bed. I was like, that's crazy that I just said that in my head. There's one text that says, Bonsoir, monsieur, je suis Cheval, et j'ai une réservation pour deux, and I literally just put a semicolon with a backslash. That's my only note. I don't remember why I put that. I cannot elaborate. They get caught by paparazzi, and like one little tabloid writes a paper or whatever, an article being like, oh my gosh, sleazeball. And she freaks out and runs to Richard. She's like, can you have them take it down? And he's like, my philosophy, I can't do that because then they know that they've struck a chord, and they know that what I'm asking them to remove is sensitive to me, and they will keep using that as fuel. She's like, but they never talk about Bijou. He's like, because my lawyers are on that. She's a child, you know? And she's like, that's crazy. And they get in this they get in this little like argument, whatever. And what? No, okay. Sorry, before that, I did just want to say the last sentence in chapter 18 is, this will probably all blow over in a matter of hours. And my notes on that literally just says famous last words Lamau. First sentence for chapter 19, it did not blow over in a matter of hours. That's so funny. Anyway, I love when people I love that trope of like says something and then like the complete opposite, you know, happens like next scene or whatever. I don't know, I just thought it was funny. So they get into that argument, and he's like, well, you know what, this is like just something that you're gonna have to get used to if you're gonna date me. She was like, well, maybe we shouldn't be dating. And that chapter ends with, I'm Abigail Jane Atkinson, and I'm no longer silencing my voice to protect another man's ego. Better to be a troublemaker than a doormat. This goes back to what her mom said, because she said that she was scared of like showing her face back at the lab because everyone would think she was a troublemaker. Her mom's like, well, don't be a doormat. I didn't raise you like that. And my note on that was, I'm sure this won't blow up in her face. So then Richard is like, I have to go back home. This deal that we're trying to get is sinking, and I need to go be hands-on in the office. She's like, really, Richard? Really? You can't stay here for the last 2 weeks with your daughter? She's been having the time of her life, and you can't even do this? And, they get in, like, this whole argument, and then he's like, you hate me. She's like, I don't hate you, I just want you to defend me. He was like, how? There's no defense in a gossip war. Then he says, the fact is, people are gonna have their opinions about you. They're gonna say what they want to say and think what they want, and there's damn little you can do about it. And also, that is a good point. He is a bit on the extreme spectrum of that, because you can stop defamation, which they were, like, it was getting to the point where it did get her fired from, like, the tutoring position, but that's because she broke the contract, because there's, like, no, like, fraternizing with, like, the parents. But also, like, other job perspectives were denying her because of these articles, so now she's like, okay, but this is, like, you know, so that is, like, actually grounds, because, you know, and, you know, like, while that is a good message, also, you know, in moderation, which is generally how all of these things are, everyone is kind of on an extreme, and it's kind of your job as the reader and Abby's journey to decipher what the middle ground is and what a good and healthy middle ground is. I think that's important. She reads romance books throughout it, as she picked it up from Coco. She was like, maybe I should stop reading all that. She literally only reads scientific, like, literature. And then she's like, you know what, I should read some romance books or something. She reads romance books. And then, or no, sorry, she picked that up from Richard because he read fantasy books. After this breakup, she stopped reading the romance books. She's reading psychological thrillers. I wrote, oh god, she's lost it. There's another quote that says, for all his wealth and all his accomplishments, he's fairly unassuming guy, a good guy. And I said, why, he's hoarding it. Why is he hoarding it? So they go back home. She's like, I'll still tutor Bijou for the last 2 weeks. Mind you, she'd been getting, like, really far ahead. You find out that this idea of failure, this fear of failure, had come from her mother being like, you're not going to get into Harvard if you fail 6th grade and 7th grade mathematics. Girl. And Richard is like, you'll never be a failure to me, and her mom's like, you will be a failure, basically. So you find out, okay, well, the press has been slamming Richard while praising Veronica. Veronica's the one that sucks, though, you know. So there's that idea that she's kind of controlling the press, or at least the way the media viewed their relationship. So then she goes back to her apartment, with Arpita. Arpita grabs her a canned margarita. I was like, that's a callback. That's classic. And then her mom says that she had ordered some informational brochures on some colleges because she said if she had gone to college, she would have wanted to be like an art historian and wanted to like work in a museum. And Abby was like, it's never too late to start. It gets never too late to go pursue that. And so then in here you see she orders those brochures. This is, I think, the last time her mom's mentioned in chapter 21. But you see that with her character, she's growing and developing along with Abby. And I don't know, I just really like three-dimensional supporting characters. I think that's great. Anyway, so then they're in the apartment. They're in Richard and like in Richard's place. She's tutoring Bijou obviously right, and after he says like, you know, he says like, you know, like, I'm really sorry. She said, what's done is done, and he said, but I was wrong not to respect your point of view. Very wrong. And he goes on like this whole spiel about like, you know, basically like, I'm so sorry, I've thought about this for like so long from my perspective that it just didn't really occur to me how much, it didn't hit me how much it hurt or affected you until I really saw the ramifications. He was like, he's upset and mopey, and Bijou's upset and mopey and sad, and, you know, like, he's seeing that side of everything, you know, and he came to the conclusion after literally like a few days and was like, you know what, I'm sorry. And yeah, that's beautiful. I love it when characters apologize and have adult communication. That's great. So then she's like, okay, cool, well, Philip, who's the head of the math department, sent an email. She's like, I gotta go because he wants to meet me. She goes in, and it turns out that Nick, who was her mentor, who was advising her research, who had stolen her research, had been accused by a bunch of other people of stealing work and falsifying data for his dissertation. So he was under review and whatever. So then the school's launching an official investigation. So they called her in to like talk with her. She was like, so you guys never launched an official one to begin with? And he's like, we meant reopening it. But she's like, no, you definitely just never investigated it officially as a school. She hands him a letter of resignation. She's like, I want you to see that research has been credited to me, and also here's my resignation. And she says, quote, I'm free. And I was like, that's great. I said per. That was my notes. And, you know, you start to see this wrap up. We never get resolution with what happens with him. I assume bad things, hopefully. And, but, you know, she says, like, at first, because he didn't really react, and like, oh, please don't go, and she felt small. But she said that, like, as she was leaving the building, she felt bigger and bigger because she was taking things into her own hands and doing what was going to make her happy. She was like, I don't want to be a physicist, like, in the sense of, like, I don't want to be a physics professor forever. She was like, I want to be a teacher, like, small, like, high schoolers or middle schoolers or something. She's like, I want to make a difference in a classroom of kids learning this stuff for the first time, not like adults, you know. And she has that set path. She knows like what she needs to do to get there, and she's already taken steps for it. And it's like, okay, period. And then at one point she's, you know, like her last tutoring session or like her second to last, and Bijou's like, my dad's really sad that you left him. And Coco is like, hey, did you see this paper? And basically Richard had him and his attorneys like put out a statement basically being like, on God, you take these articles down. That's fucked up. Like, we're gonna get you on God. On my mama. My lawyer's gonna find your ass and beat you. He didn't say it like that. He was basically just like, there will be legal ramifications. You're gonna be slapped by legal. And then after the tutoring session, he says, I'll apologize until the end of time if it means you'll give me another chance. Like, I miss you. Like, I'm so sorry. And she's like, okay. That's like, the equivalent of, like, I'm begging for your forgiveness. And it's like, well, then beg. But then, like, if he did beg, because that's basically, like, what happened in that situation. So, kind of queenie. She ends up having Coco and Arpita meet up in a bar. They're going to happy hour. And, like, she's like, oh my gosh, my girls are meeting each other. She says, so I pull up my Google Alerts, the one I set for my name and Richard's name, and tap the little trash can beside them. When my phone asks me, are you sure you want to delete these alerts? I can't press the yes button fast enough. That's where this news belongs, in the trash. And this is where you see that side that she wants to maintain, to a certain degree, maintain her image, not obviously want her name, like, smeared through the mud, but while also understanding and accepting that idea that Richard had presented of there's not much you can do. If people are going to talk, they're going to talk, So having that growth between, like, literally having a Google alert so your phone pings every time an article comes up with your name on it, and, like, deleting that, and, like, understanding, like, you know what, if this is the relationship I want, these are what I'm gonna have to do. Like, these are the things I'm going to have to do and things I'm gonna have to work towards to be in this relationship, and she's working towards them. And I'm like, wow, these are great foundations for a relationship. And then they reveal that Coco's little story got published in the New Yorker. And Coco says, goals are plans with action items and deadlines, things you achieve or don't. Dreams are more like fantasies, wishes from your heart. You can't fail at a dream because dreams are endless. When a dream comes true, it's like magic, because she had been saying, like, if I get rejected, whatever. But she's really excited about this. She's like, this was a dream of mine, but it wasn't a goal. Because if you don't meet a goal, you can set yourself back mentally. If you don't meet a dream, that's not always realistic, So, queen. And then, yeah, so then my notes here were just like, mom ending, and then I was like, Philip? I meant to write Nick, because that's just where I was, like, kind of confused, like, whatever happened with that. But I can also see, like, they're no longer important to the character anymore, so, we don't have to mention it. We don't have to put any more energy as the reader to think about these characters, because Abby is not, So I'm not too upset about that. That was just, like, something I'm just nosy. And then I was like, I want to know what happened up with mom. But also her spot where she's like, you know what? I didn't make any promises. I just said I'm looking at things. That open-mindedness is refreshing and very nice. I don't know, it's just very, like, even the gripes that I kind of have with the ending of me being like, well, what happens with this character? What happens with this character? I can make arguments for why it was written like that. The only thing, Miss Arpita got nothing from this. She was, lifeline number one. When things went wrong, calling Arpita, Or, like, she's got a canned margarita. She didn't get anything. Coco got her book published. She didn't even get, like... You know what? Because Abby bought her, like, expensive almonds from one of the places, but then she ate them. She felt guilty about it, but she ate them. She didn't get anything from this. So, I don't know. Queen of maybe she'll get another book. In the About the Author section, it says Kristn Rockaway, which is the author, I don't remember if I mentioned that, is a native New Yorker. And, of course, my note for that is no one opens the door for a native New Yorker. But altogether, like I said, I think that this book is incredibly well done, especially for the romance genre. Its characters very, very clearly have depth and thought and love put into them, and the relationship that's formed within the universe is never a question of, well, how did that happen? Because, like I said, you see the signs along the way. I also forgot to mention, Veronica ends up going on this whole, like, I don't know why my husband has moved on from me. They've been divorced for, like, ever, like, 6 years or something, because she cheated on him. But, that was never resolved. That was another thing I was kind of like, But like, the characters had a lot of thought put into them. Even like the story, like with her mom, where like her mom was like a really annoying character in the beginning, just because she was so much harping on her for like, you need to finish this PhD, but then you find out her fear that her daughter would regret it, like she had regretted not going to college. So you understand more of her motive, and she does warm up to it. She says, you know what, like she gets to a point where she does go like, you know what, I will support you, no matter what you do. Like I always love you, basically. And she has her come around moment, and like everyone, Bijou becomes more confident in herself, and like everyone kind of had growth except for Apita and that poor Australian guy. Neither of them won in this story. Sequel idea, Australian boy, and Arpita. Those are my thoughts. I thought it was a great book. Like I said, I don't know, it was just so shocking to read a book where like everybody is treated with respect and like a human being, and people aren't degraded for like X, Y, or Z. And like I said, I just pretended the entire time that he did not have $1 billion and was just kind of like regular weird rich. Like, like how Michael Jackson had like a monkey, and we're all like, oh, okay. Not like Jeff Bezos, but it's a good book. That's my 2 cents on it. It's a good book, a great book even. And if you want to read it, like I said, it is called Smart Girl Summer, and it is by Kristn Rockaway, and I will include that in the description.